Good morning. This is Saturday, Break the Cage, and this is Kellen with green hair today. So Kellen with green hair will be doing our Break the Cage broadcast. I've been to Mars recently, and that's just one of the artifacts of having been in the Martian planet with the little green men. So we're going to talk today about destroying distractions. Destroying distractions, and the things that I promised we'd cover today are the following three things, and there's actually more. Look at your environment. You'll find it all in there. Learn how to take control and how change is helpful. Not all change is helpful, wanted, or needed, but you have to learn to see and know the difference. So today, we're talking about your environment. So the last 2 weeks, we have talked about the first one was clarifying your objectives. What is it exactly that you want to do, and how come it's important to know that, to be clear about it, to be crystal well described about it so that it draws you forward? Okay, so we talked 2 weeks ago about that, about those objectives, why they're important, how to set them, how to know when they're real, and how to make them magnetic and drawing you forward. Then last week we talked about strategizing actions that are not just activity for its own sake, that are not just busy work, but that are related. We talked about that lens through which you look at your daily activities through the lens, and the lens is your 90-day goals. It's really interesting because the conference I was at for the last 3 days, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, was put on by a friend of mine, Daryl Eves. Now, Daryl is a madman for objectives. He is raging. He was able to call on several people in the audience. I'm sure he didn't plant this, but people that know him well, and ask, right there, so what do you think about me getting objectives? And they all laughed, individually, because they had their turn to comment, that he was like nobody else, a raging madman for objectives. I know personally that he writes his daily objectives on little 3x5 cards and puts them in his car. And, so he can see them everywhere. He carries them in his pocket. They're on his bathroom mirror. They are everywhere. And so for him, setting objectives is a religion. It is a raging practice. He does it in all areas of his life. Now, this isn't just business. And so he talked about being balanced, and he talked about a number of the things that I talk about in Break the Cage, being body, balance, and business. He talked about body in the sense of health overall. He is quite heavy. And so he talks about that sometimes too, about he's eating, he eats too much and he's too heavy. So, there's some things that are still out of balance. But the bottom line is, in terms of objectives, he's a madman about getting them clear. And every July he sets a 3-year target, and then 2-year, 1-year, 90-day, and so forth. So the kind of things that we talked about last year are critical. They are taught by every guru who will teach you about how to create great results, and we talk about results on a rampage on another Hangout, and this is Break the Cage. And people sometimes ask me, why do I have so many different ones that overlap? And the answer is simple. Speed to Profit Marketing is specifically for businesses. It's talking about things that you need to do in business to create awareness, the right message in front of the right people at the right time, your marketing, right? We tie it back to personal story. We tie it back to all of those things which are key to differentiating yourself in this world in your business. Results on a Rampage is specifically centered around the book that I just wrote 2 weeks ago called The Results Equation, or about how to go through a process that lets you achieve a particular result. Break the Cage, on the other hand, is about it's about breaking free. We all have weights, albatrosses, rocks, thoughts, feelings, patterns, beliefs, ideas that hold us back. And breaking the cage is the process of jumping out of those. And it's centered around a core 4, the being, body, balance, business that I talk about. It's centered around how to set specific objectives, which is a piece of Results on a Rampage and the Results Equation, but in a different way. So that's the reason we do that. And today is the third of 5 pieces. We did the clarify your objectives. We talked about figuring out what you're going to do or your actions. Today is look at your environment. What's around you? What are the distractions and things that are getting in the way? Next week is about skills. Do you need to change or acquire or sharpen skills that you have? And then the 5th week will, of course, be about the head games, mastering the psychology. And some of those might be some distractions, too. And then distractions that are head games we'll put off until week 5. So today we're going to talk about your environment. What's going on around you? What do you allow into your life that keeps you, distracts you from getting done what you need to do? So let's make it a really simple and obvious start. The first one is look at your environment. You'll find it there. If I have a problem, and I have had clients who have come to me for these kinds of habit problems, I drink too much. Let's pretend that I do that. And yet I surround myself still going to the same places with the same people and the same stimulus that either led to or kept me in that problem. My chances of changing all that are small. Okay? My chances of making myself different in that regard are small, and that would be obvious. So if I have a drinking problem and I meet my friends at the same bar all the time, it's going to be a tough road to hoe. Okay, so that's an obvious one, and I start there. But let's look at some others. Let's say I have, a problem wasting a lot of time watching television. I'm a TV addict, and I have certain shows, and the number grows and shrinks with the seasons, but I do that all the time. Well, if I keep looking at the same things online, if I keep track of the plot lines of my favorite shows, if I talk to the same people at work about the same things, if I put the television and the remote in the same circumstance, if I don't vary my routine at all, then the chances of my changing myself to not watching TV are not very good. I won't. I'll stick with it. I'll watch TV and I'll still do the things that I did. On the other hand, if you want to change that environmental piece or that habit, break the routine. So, for example, I can choose, and this is something I did, okay? I've never been much of a TV watcher in my life, and I'm, like when I go on trips, I never even turn the television on in the hotel room. Here it's rarely on either. There might be 1 or 2 shows that I watch in a week with my wife as kind of our unwind time in the evening for 45 minutes or 50 minutes or whatever they are. Usually they're recorded so I can speed through the commercials, and we do it at dinner, maybe, on some nights, if we don't have anything that we want to talk about specifically. So that might be my entire week, and there are many, many, many weeks that go by without any TV at all. So that particular thing is not a distraction for me, but there are others. So let's talk about TV, if that's one for you. Put the remote somewhere else. Stop following the plot lines of the plays. Intentionally look at other things on the internet to pique your interest that aren't related to television. Change the conversations you have at work. And that's all in addition to, those are environmental factors. Yeah, move the TV if you have to. Disconnect it. So it would be a pain to have to go connect it up and turn it on. Those are kind of extreme measures, but those are all necessary depending on how strong the pull is. If you know that that's a huge thing and it's really keeping you from doing that, all right, so look at another one. Let's say I eat too much. And I've got food here. I need to change the food in the refrigerator. I need to not buy certain things. Somebody else needs to do the shopping. I need to vary the way I walk through the house so I don't walk by the fridge. I need to intentionally get triggers for me that are not food related. And if I use food as a coping mechanism for stress or something, then I need to intentionally replace it. All right, food's been my coping mechanism. I figure that out every time I'm stressed or sad. I go munch on, whatever it is, not celery, obviously. Then I need to change that and get some other coping mechanism. Maybe I need to go for a walk. Maybe I need to get outside and get away for a minute. Maybe I need to go read. Maybe I need to go pray. Maybe I need to go intentionally have a conversation with my spouse if they're willing to do that for me. Say, look, I'm trying to get the food thing out, so can I do that? Maybe you need to call a friend, whatever it is. There's something you can do to change in your environment to get rid of that distraction. So the first principle is this. If you find yourself distracted and distracted by something that keeps you from doing your goals, so that is your go-to thing, your go-to coping mechanism, first identify it. I'm wasting too much time doing X. Figure out what your X is, right? Second of all, identify it as a distraction. I know this is a distraction for me. It's not something I need to do. It's not something that's particularly helpful. And it's not getting me toward my goals. In fact, the opposite. So I'm identifying that as a distraction, and I put a red X on it. Third, when you decide to do something about it, you don't need to eliminate it. Well, you might need to if it's bad habit, and you're trying to quit smoking or something. But if it's, watching too much TV, you can say, what, I choose to watch 3 hours a week, and here are the 3 programs, and other than that, I'm done. And then go ahead with the, the practice of replacing the distraction. So that's the first thing. Look in your environment, figure out what are the distractions that are bothering me, label them as distractions, honestly admit I'm done with the excuses, I want to make those changes, right? And then replace them, set some specific objectives, and get replacement things. So instead of eating, I'm going to X, or instead of, pouting or laying on the couch or feeling sorry for myself or whatever your distraction is, I'm going to Y. And then implement those. The last step is, don't beat yourself up. It's not helpful if you have a problem. In drinking terminology, they call those things relapses, right? If you have a relapse and have a bad TV day, you don't have to commit suicide. It would be really nice if you just say, that was bad. And then go to, where was the trigger? What did I do? What was the thought and feeling that was in the way right before I did that? Now, these are all techniques and tools used in therapy and used in other intense situations to change serious habits. And so I know they work for those, and I also know they work for distractions. So that's looking around you. So I've been talking for 10 minutes now, and so I want to give a break here, and I want to talk about, give everybody that's here, Rick and Joy, if you want to, or people all look in the stream, distractions that you have and that you have identified as distractions that have caused you to keep from achieving your goals. Anybody with comments? I don't see any, so I'll go on with some others that I know. Some people like to overanalyze. Sometimes that's blamed on a particular profession. Engineers and accountants and people like that are very, very detail-oriented like to overanalyze. Quite often that's a manifestation of fear. So fear is the distraction. I'm afraid that I will make a wrong decision. I'm afraid that I won't do it right. And so I'm going to keep looking at it, more data, more proof. Why? I just want to make sure that I'm doing it right. There is a place for analysis and data. There's a place at which analysis and data will not remove the remaining fear and will not remove the remaining risk. And there is no such thing as a perfect choice, and there is no such thing as perfect analysis. And so the answer there is you have to move and get feedback from market. You have to move and get feedback from your situation. You have to finally actually take the choice, like that old song. Did you ever have to finally decide, right? It came from the 60s, I think. And it was a funny song and a whimsical tune, but it carried a powerful, powerful message. So if you find yourself an overanalyzer, if you find yourself a hesitator, like a guy that's faking in football, but he doesn't actually go, he just keeps faking until he's sacked, those things are habits, those things are destructive, and they do keep us from making decisions. You have to fire the gun and steer the bullet. We've talked about ready, fire, steer in another Hangout in one of the series. May have been this one. But that is true, and it is becoming truer because things change too fast. Analysis that was 3 months ago, 1 month ago, sometimes even yesterday, is too old and doesn't reflect current market data, feeling data, resource data that we have, or our own position and intention. All right, so that was the first thing, is look at your environment. That is your physical environment. Excuse me. It also might be, and we're going to put one more section on this before we move to part 2, which is learn how to take control, your emotional environment. The psychological internal environment we're going to save for the last one. But your emotional environment might be your relationships. Now, I'm going to put a disclaimer right here. I'm not talking about anybody beginning or ending relationships, and I'm not advocating that because I don't know enough about anyone's individual circumstance. So don't hear that. But you might. Big pause on purpose. And here's the reason. It might not be a relationship with a person. It might be a relationship with a habit. It might be a relationship with a process that you go through. You might need to end a relationship. Knowing, especially if it's a long-standing habit, and that's how I think of habits, is relationships. You have a relationship with a particular coping mechanism. It might be physical, like smoking or drinking or eating. It might be emotional, like taking comfort from watching TV or from piddling around, with different hobbies and messing around while the big elephant you should be moving on is left starving. So you might need to end that relationship. And if it's a long-standing relationship and a deep relationship that has provided you with a lot of comfort and a lot of escapism, it might be hard. And so the emotional circumstance, if you have toxic people around you that are constantly telling you, you can't do that, you'll never make it, it won't happen, you'll suck, you're going to fail, you might need to end that relationship. You might need to end the friendship and the visits and the time with someone that is constantly bringing you down, because they're not helping you. They're not being an honest sounding board. They're reflecting their own limitations of thinking. I'll say that again. They're reflecting their own laziness, limitations of thinking, and unwillingness to make moves in their own life. Maybe they're angry because they're stuck. And they desperately don't want you, especially if you've commiserated together about a lot of stuff, right? They don't want you to take off and do cool stuff, because then they're left alone. So this is one of the hard ones. You have to look at your emotional environment and see if there are toxic elements in it. Toxic memories of past failures. Toxic memories of past successes. And I'll never duplicate that. Toxic people, toxic attitudes, distracting activities that are emotionally satisfying for the moment, or not emotionally satisfying, but they pass just enough time so that we can get to where I can say, I don't have time to do it now. It would take 2 hours. I only have 30 minutes, so no sense in starting. That kind of crap. Okay? So emotional environment is key, as well as your physical environment. Now, I'm going to throw in this for just as an adder, there may be physical things. Your desk may be in a bad place. There may be bad sunlight. It may be in a dark corner. You may need to change the lighting in a room. You may need to change the wallpaper or the paint or the setup. You may need to move your desk to another room. You may need to rearrange the furniture. There are things like that, and I'm not a big feng shui freak or anything like that, but I know that when I don't have my work area well lit, except when I want it dark when I'm editing and I want the screen to be dark, I want the cave effect, if I don't have the ability to light my work area really well and bright and cheery and happy, it's not attractive. I need to be able to have bright light. I don't always work in bright light, okay? Like right now, I don't have a bright light in front of me, or I have some lights on the side for the green screen and stuff like that. But I can make this corner really light if I need to, okay? So I can make my studio, recording studio, this is the video part, and then there's a video studio downstairs. Lots of lights. I can make that really bright. I've got 3 studios in the house. So I have lighting specific for the area. And that's intentional. I can get mood lighting. I can get bright lighting. I can do that because lighting and color has a lot to do with it. Maybe your desk is uncomfortable. Maybe your chair is uncomfortable. Okay? And so if you associated a certain area with something in your house, I always went to that corner when I felt bad and did messing around, surfing the net or whatever. Move your furniture. Redo the mental triggers. Get over it. Maybe you need to physically take some action. So your physical environment, lighting, paint, memories, colors, feelings, chairs, posture, furniture, all of those things might be distractions. Your relationship environment, relationship with people, friends, loved ones, you may need to do that. I know people, and I've done this. I've cut specific people out of my life, even people that were close to me before because they were not uplifting. Had to do it. The effect, I'm not judging whether they were bad people or not, it doesn't matter. The effect of the relationship was getting in the way. Seriously. So I had to make changes or forever circle in that. Now, I don't mean I hate them, and it doesn't mean I never talk to them, but I do it in a different context. And I do it having taken control. All right, so let's move on to number 2 because we're going to run out of time here. Number 2, learn how to take control. So we went over that a little bit. Excuse me for the scratchy voice today. I'm going to give another chance to talk here, so I'll be quiet. Anybody have any comments that is here with us live today?
You probably didn't. You were watching the camera when you started talking about engineering types, and I'm over here going like this.
Well, I thought about that. I knew you were an engineer, so I thought you might be grinning or dancing or running.
Oh, yeah. You brought up an interesting thought for me, and I'll be very brief, and that is that I'm old enough to come from the school where I was trained to know what I'm going to do before I do it. And the paralysis analysis has been a problem for me in my in the efforts that I've made to change the way I operate in my industry, because the industry is moving past me faster than I can keep up with it. If I worry about, do I know enough about how to keep up with that, as opposed to just, I'm going to get on this moving vehicle, whatever it is, and somehow or other do my best to keep up with it and find a place where I can make a contribution given the skills and the talents and the background that I do have, as opposed to waiting until I understand the whole thing and I have the answers, which is how I was trained coming up. But now that totally doesn't work. And so that was a very good point, and thank you.
You bet. So let's talk about that a little bit. One of the things that people do who like to know everything, just what you said, let's just take your example, is they think they have to have it all done before they start. And the answer is you will never have it all done. There's always going to be somebody that knows more than you and smarter than you. And that goes for me too. There's somebody that knows more about Hangouts or about music in the studio or about writing songs or about painting or any of the things that I do. But here's the question. That's actually the wrong question. Do you know enough to help somebody? Do you know enough to be a guide to those that are behind you on the train? Do you know enough to be useful and make a contribution to somebody, not everybody? Everybody in the world isn't your client. Everybody in the world isn't your avatar. The person behind you who needs what you know is your avatar. That's why particularly people that have had some years, have a little seasoning in life, I guess, are extremely valuable. That's why in cultures like the Native American, the grandmas were the guides. They had a little bit of a women-centric culture where women were in charge, but besides that, it was the old ones. And they even call it in some cultures the old ones, the elders, and all that sort of thing. Excuse me, and the reason is because the accumulated experience is valuable in and of itself. And so the right question isn't, do I know it all, or even sort of it all? Do I know enough to be helpful? Frank Kern says it this way. If he says if you're 2 or 3 weeks ahead of your client, you're good. And that might sound a little flip, but the answer is if your client can get where they are going faster with your knowledge and insights and tips and tricks and help than they can without it, you're good. Okay? Now that implies that you keep learning. It's like in martial arts. You cannot award a student your same belt rank if you're an instructor. So I'm a second-degree black belt. I could award first degree, but I cannot award someone a second degree because I am only second degree. I never finished to go on to third and fourth because it just was too demanding from a time perspective. But so I cannot award a second-degree black belt because that is equal to my knowledge in that frame. And so, but below that, I can award up to first dan. And so that is a model in my mind to think anyone that is less skilled than I am at a particular thing that interests me and that I want to teach, I am an adequate instructor. So that model serves me well to think about that and to get off the analysis paralysis piece. And yeah, I did actually think about you a little bit during that. Okay, let's move on to part 2. And thank you for being the whipping boy for this little section. Learn how to take control. I see Rick laughing, so those of you that watch later, he's giggling at this point. Learn how to take control. So there's some really interesting steps here. The first thing is simply to admit it. You know what, I'm using this as an excuse, okay? I mean, as much as this hurts, I may not know why I'm using it for an excuse. I'm using it for an excuse because I'm afraid. I'm using it as an excuse because I was trained to know it all before I started. And an interesting antidote to that is know it all can be a relative thing. I don't know everything there is to know about business ownership. I don't know everything there is to know about marketing. There are people in the internet space and in entrepreneurship that are further along than I am. I know enough to get me further down the road, and I know enough to bring some clients with me. I don't even know what knowing it all means in that space. A lot of that is situational, particularly in the coaching mode. Coaching is giving the person what they need to get moving it past the barriers they're at. There's no such thing as knowing it all. I guess you could define knowing it all as knowing in every situation all the time what anyone might ever need. Maybe that's God or something. I know enough to do really good for my clients. I know enough to be perceptive about their needs and to help them take the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 steps. And that absolutely qualifies me and you as a person to make a contribution and help people on the road. So the first thing to take control is to decide that you want control, really. Because, excuse me just a moment. As you may or may not have read in the comments, I came home with a cold and some other stuff. I don't know what from LA, so I'm a little under the weather, but that's okay. The show must go on. Decide you want control. Some people love abdicating control because then they have an excuse. They have a way to give it off. It's not my fault. I don't really run this show anyway. It's the boss's fault. Up there. God's fault. Somebody else, the significant other, the family, who cares? The mob, whatever. So truly decide you want control and you're willing to have it, because when you take control, the buck stops in your hand. It doesn't stop somewhere else. It stops with you. That, for me, is a thing of rejoicing. I love having control. Sometimes I hate myself for thinking I have control and I didn't do this or that. Okay, fine. Relax. Get off the hate cycle. You know, you can do it again tomorrow. Don't be so hard, etc., etc. So being a high-performance madman, high-performance grandmaster, and a raging example of raging success in a lot of areas has its drawbacks. Okay? I do get after myself sometimes, and a lot of times too hard. And Joy can tell you about that if she chooses to at the next break. But the point is, decide that you want control and that you're willing to accept that responsibility. You're willing to take control and responsibility and accountability, and that you want it. That's number one. Number two, then you decide what it is that you're abdicating. I'm abdicating the excuses for my distractions. I'm abdicating, I have been, blaming my environment or my feelings or my relationships or so-and-so that I talked to. Admit that. We talked about these steps here a minute ago. So admit, first of all, decide to take control and that you want it. And then you can decide what the particular distraction and distractions are. And it's really useful here to be ruthless. To be ruthless and honest about what they are and where your time goes, and that they're really distractions and getting in the way of getting what you want. And then you can make a plan, a specific plan about what to do about it. And those things, all of them, are really useful areas for a coach. Coming to through the mental gymnastics that you actually want control and you're willing to accept that responsibility is sometimes hard, and a coach is really useful there. Coaching is really useful in picking your areas of distraction, and from an outside perspective, hearing someone say, well, every time I hear you say this or do this, or each time we talk, you talk about this. What about, and that what about, or what would you think about, those kinds of questions are really helpful. Because from an outside perspective, they just look like distractions. Somebody that's mired in the middle of that emotional dance, they look like a pillar of life. Somebody, to a coach, they just look like a distraction, and there may be all kinds of ways to do it that someone who's mired in the pillar of life for that particular thing just can't see. And so they look like they're pillars anchored in, concrete. And they're not. They're just things that you can change. So taking control, those are the first two steps, and the third step is obviously to create a plan, a future vision of you without that circumstance, without that distraction, or of success in the goal, or of achieving the objective, and you can see a path right to it. Sometimes if you just open the curtain, all of a sudden you can see the path to the goal, and the curtain has been right there and you just didn't know where the drawstring was. So admit you want it, decide to take it, figure out what the blocks are, and get them in their true perspective, and then create a path to get from where you are to that new you. And those things can be short. One can be done in a week. I mean, I had a client who was several years ago who was having a particular issue, and it was about a relationship with their spouse. And so we delved into that a bit, and they told me all the details about it. And so it was a simple plan. Well, every time this happens, do this. Is that possible for you to just make that mental commitment? And it wasn't very hard. And he said, yeah, I can do that. Within a week, the whole thing had changed, and he made a commitment simply to do that. And it was something he hadn't thought of before. Every time this happens, do this. Okay, sure, I can do that. And it made a huge change, and it was from the outside perspective, and it was just thinking about it in a new way and making a commitment to make a small change. And so that distraction got completely out of the way. Boom, done. It took 7 days. And it had been a long-standing concern of theirs. So those things can happen. So after you create the plan and then implement it, of course, make adjustments as necessary. And again, that's where coaching is so effective, because accountability, when you've promised someone else you're going to go do that, you don't really want to show up a week later and say, or 2 weeks, depends on how often you coach, oh yeah, you know, I suck, I didn't do that. Again, that gets old. And if you do that a lot, then that really means you don't want to make a change. So that is the process of taking control. That is the process of assuming responsibility and taking responsibility for your own life. So let me open it up again about judging ourselves, being too hard on ourselves, or the process that I just described of taking control of our environment and our distractions, which of course today's coaching session is designed to help us learn to destroy. Comments? Wow, I must not be stimulating enough today. Maybe if I get up and dance on the desk, it'll be stimulating. All right, so how change is helpful. Not all change is helpful, wanted, or needed, and learn to see and know the difference. So let's talk about that, because this is really useful. One of the things that happens when someone starts coaching is they just start looking for stuff to change. I can do this, and I can do this, and I can do this. And those become distractions. One of the huge distractions that people have, especially multi-talented people, is they want to try everything. This is one that I tease my wife about a little bit. I say, well, she always says about a meal, about a scarf, about clothes, about anything. Well, I could do that. And my standard answer has become, you know something, dear? Yes, you could do that. And you might well be able to do it better than the one that we're looking, using, seeing, having, experiencing. But is that really the thing you want to spend your time doing? Because learning to do that would mean maybe taking a class, certainly researching it online, developing a skill, acquiring the equipment or tools, and then mastering that skill. And it's very likely you're a very talented, creative person. She's an artist, loves to make jewelry, paint scarves, and as well as sell on eBay and design websites and everything else. And so then when we get through that, it's like, no, I probably don't want to become a excellent whatever it is, right? And so that's been a tool that I've used with her to channel the, I could do that. I could do that. I know. I could probably do a great job at it. Is that really what you want to be known for, is a great that? Well, not really. Well, then just be content with the knowledge that your skill would let you be excellent at that. But if you do that, you won't be able to do the things that you're doing now. Okay, and so that's another distraction, starting too many things. Change for change's sake is not necessary. It's disruptive. Routine is helpful. One of the things that we have talked about before is habits. Habits are powerful servants, and they are awful masters. So let me give you a really easy to understand example. If I get in the habit of getting out of bed at a certain time in the morning that I like, I try to get up early, 5. It's a habit I got from being a child. We got up early when I was a kid. Stuff happened early at that kind of schedule, and so even in grade school we got up really early. We went to bed early too, so it wasn't like sleep deprivation or anything. That can be a really good habit. So I wouldn't just change that. I think I'll try getting up at 8 for a while just to do that, because that habit is a fabulous servant. I wake up automatically at 5 minutes to 5. Doesn't matter almost what time I go to bed, so sometimes I'll sleep on purpose because I know I've only had 2, 3, or 4 hours of sleep, and I need a little more than that. So I'll turn it off, but it doesn't matter regardless. I wake up at that time, and then I can make a choice about the day or the week or whatever. But that habit is a great servant. On the other hand, a habit to waste a lot of time, to come home, grab the newspaper, flop in front of the TV, and then find myself 2, 3 hours later having used that time for unwinding. Or if I have a habit to come home and drink a couple beers and get a little buzz, and then I find myself lazy and unable to concentrate. Or if I have a habit of getting up late and rushing around in the morning until I'm late for work, or late for my projects, or late for assignments, that's not a helpful habit. So determine which habits serve you and which ones don't. fortify those that serve you, and eliminate those that don't. Use the change process we have described. So the question I ask is, will changing this routine, will changing this pattern, will changing this behavior move me toward my goal faster? Again, I have to have the benchmark, the goal, the objective. It might be I want to make a certain amount of money this quarter or this year. The question is simple. Is this a money-producing activity, or does it lead directly to a money-producing activity? Now, if we go back a couple points, and I say acquiring a new skill, which we're going to talk about next week, that's going to lead to money. So I really need to learn how to use some web program that helps me market my autoresponder email. You know what? That's actually going to lead to more money. I can write better follow-up email sequences, and I can do better stuff. All right, fine. I devote 2 hours a week or an hour a day to study, and the study topic for today is AWeber, and maybe all week. So I'm going to spend an hour a day digging into that stuff, set a timer for an hour, boom. There's my study time. I did it because it has the prospect of leading me directly to, improvement in business, customer relationship, and eventually more cash. So being rigorous and truthful. Truthful is the main key, and we'll talk about truth as the final point here in a minute. Being rigorous and truthful about what an activity does or doesn't do for you is the massive key to determining whether or not a habit needs to be changed or whether or not something is a distraction that you need to destroy. The last piece I want to talk about is truth. Truth is the key to all of this. We often lack the ability to be really honest with ourselves. We have ingrained ourselves with excuses so long and so often that we simply become content with the stories that we tell. The stories that we tell. One of the ways to tell if something is a story or truth is to tell it to your coach and say, I'm having trouble deciding if this one's truth or story. Again, that outside perspective, it often doesn't work with a spouse or friend because they've become used to seeing you in that. Now, if it's distressing, then a good friend will be able to tell you, that's a bunch of crap and you've been doing that for a long time, I know it, and it sucks. So you might have a friend that can do that for you. But that's another role that a coach plays. And so if you're either thinking of being a coach or you need one, again, that is something that you can lean on them and should lean on them for. So today has been all about destroying distractions in your environment. So your environmental distractions, people, places, circumstances, desk, physical things, lighting, all that kind of stuff. It's been about how to identify them and how to take control, and it's been about deciding which ones are important to change and which ones don't matter, which habits serve you and which ones make you a slave. Hopefully the things that we have talked about today have given you additional tools and certainly food for thought, but food for thought is only that. It feeds your mind and not your action. So until you turn it into action, execution, and change, it won't serve you. We'll open it up one last time for questions before we end today's episode of Break the Cage Now. Any other final questions or comments? Okay, I want to let you know places you can get help. www.breakthecagenow.com. www.breakthecagenow.com is the place for radical change candidates, people that want to make big changes in their lives now, to go and get an opportunity to see what we have to offer to help you do that. I mentioned Results on a Rampage. That's our LA Talk radio show once a week, and Speed to Profit Marketing. In that context, I have some two-day book project events coming up. Two-day book project, October 28, 29, November 22, 23, 21, 22 in November, and December 12, 13. If you want to write a book, you don't have an excuse not to get it done. You can have it done in 2 days. I know it. I've done it. I'll show you. And I will coach you through it solidly for those 2 days till it's done. If you want to do it, go to a link that's in one of the others. I'll put it back in here right now in this chat box. Thank you for showing up today. I appreciate it. I see no more comments in the stream, and with that, I will end the broadcast. Go forward and break the cage now.